Last night while I was recovering from the day's work, I did a little research on light bulbs. I'd like to replace these, I'm going to replace these with LED bulbs. These are the turn signal bulbs. Turns out that's appears to be just a standard 1156 replacement bulb. You can get an LED bulb for that for somewhere between $5 and $10. So I went ahead and bought 4 of those, one for each corner of the bike. That's the rear, that's the rear running light. It's got the same connection as the other ones. I think it showed up as 1157, but I don't think that's right. I think on a standard 1156 will work in there too. This is looking for the wattage on it. It's hard to read with my old man eyes. I think about a 5-watt bulb. This is probably about the same. 12 volt. I think it says 21 watts. Seems like a lot. Maybe that's not right. Now I gotta do a little more research. I have not yet had success finding that bulb. Obviously it needs to be replaced because it's coming apart. The replacement bulbs used to draw a lot less wattage. There's also an H4 replacement that I can take the bulb out of the headlight bulb out, and it plugs directly into the existing H4 harness. I think there's enough depth on this system. In fact, let me just show you. So in this bucket, initially there was all the wires were connected. So that this board was back here and all the wires were connected in there. And as a result, there's a lot of depth here. Looks like, I don't know, 6 inches or better. The downside with the LED headlight bulbs is that they do have a nice pigtail that plugs directly into this harness, which is great, but they do have some depth on them and they do have some heat rejection requirements. I think there's enough depth in this bucket. The replacement LED bulb, just for the standard, is about $35, or maybe $35 to $50. You can also get entire replacements that include the lens and everything, but those are $400 or $500. I'm not ready to do that. So I'm going to get those bulbs on order. I also have not yet found these folks, which are the instrument cluster lights, but I'll do a little more research on that. And once I get them in, I will show you. The nice part is, what I was getting to was that the bike computer here, hidden behind the rat's nest of wires, it already supports LED bulbs. So one of the things you'll find is that when you replace an LED bulb using standard relays, turning signals, they have a capacitor in there, and if you don't have enough load on the bulb, you end up with the really quick flashing of the bulbs that you've seen. Well, this already has provision built in, and I assume that it's really just because there's a timer inside. It's not using an old like 555 style timing circuit. It's just using logic to time the bulb out. So you don't have to get any of those load devices that you add into an LED bulb when you replace an incandescent and you're still using the original OEM turn signal flasher. So another little bonus of the MotoGadget unit. Today I'm going to get back to it. Today I'm going to be wiring the instrument cluster. So this is the largest connector I'll be using. It's an 8-pin, which is exactly what I need, so I hope my calculations are right. I'll have to tee off a little bit. I'm going to be using a common cable, obviously, for the grounds. So I've only got one ground circuit there. Then both turn signal indicators. And then one of the things that's kind of interesting is the way this works is I need to provide power to the neutral indicator and oil switch. Then that's got to go back through the actual switches, which will frame ground. So I have to get not just a common ground. See, all the other loads are an input and a ground, an input and a ground. This one has a powered input, and then it will ground out through the actual switches, which are on the left side of the bike. So I'll have to wire to those. And then, of course, just the high beam indicator, which will come off the high beam line, and the the lights. Actually, that just, okay, so a little epiphany here. I don't have to bring the high beam through this plug connector because I've already got the high beam out on a separate cable. So what I can do then is tee off the high beam and power the indicator from there. Yeah, I don't have to run that through the plug. Okay, hey, thanks for helping me figure that out. All right, more to follow. Here is an update on the headlight bucket. You can see that from the original bike we had a lot of wires tied together in here. That's all moved to the spot below the seat. The only thing left in here now is the headlight connection and the ground and power feeds for the voltmeter and clock lights. We also have the power for the clock, which right now is just taped off. Not entirely sure I'm going to use it, but it's there in case I need it. You can also see I have a little pigtail that I cut off. I had originally powered the instrumentation lights from this point, but did not realize that when you flip the high beam it turns the light connection off. So I rewired that to go off of the auxiliary power, which is now powering the rear brake lights, the dashboard lights, the instrumentation light, and the coil for the kill switch, the relay for the kill switch. I also mentioned in an earlier video that I thought I had plenty of clearance for the LED light bulb. And you can see that this is the headlight assembly, and where the standard H4 bulb went, I've got an LED light in there. Now the H4 bulb just had the plug prongs right at the back of it, and you can see this has the heatsink at the back. It's also got a pigtail, so that doesn't take up as much space. So the pigtail plugs right into the lead right there, and we actually have plenty of room to fit that back there. It looks like it probably have an inch or more of space available. So no problems there. The light's nice and bright. Pretty happy with it. This one was about $35. You can certainly spend a lot more than that, but I think this is going to be just adequate. So pretty happy with that setup, and probably will clean those wires up just a little bit more, but they are all functional. Everything seems to be working and in good shape. I had not initially planned to take apart the Gage cluster. They were looking a little bit dull, but I thought I'd just leave them be. But I had some problems with some of the lighting. The lights weren't coming on when I wanted them to. These indicator lights, you've got turn, oil pressure, generator, neutral, and high beam. The gauges themselves and the odometer were working just fine. But I thought I'd try to get those lights working, and while I was in there I figured I'd replace them with LED bulbs. So the disassembly process, and all the screws are removed right now, but the disassembly process was pretty straightforward, but I did run into some corrosion that was a little bit of a challenge. So there's a back housing here, not much to that. And then another panel right on top of that has to come out. And that has some alignment spots for the connectors. No big deal here. There's an instruction here that kind of shows you that you can pull the bulbs out from the back side. You don't have to remove this whole board here to get the bulbs out for changing. But I found that the bulbs the holders were stuck in there. When I pulled them out, I found a fair amount of corrosion, which I'll show you some issues that I had. So I unplugged these three connectors here. There's brown, green, and black, or red maybe, are the connections for the tachometer. And actually this is where I realized that I had the tach wired wrong to the ignition system, so I had to do a small rewiring to fix that. So this is the bulb cluster. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then each of the pods comes out individually. So this is the electronic tach. It's kind of keyed in there. You can see it looks like it's in actually pretty good shape. I'm trying to be careful with that. I'm sure that while it's out I have a good opportunity to damage it, but I'll try not to. set that over there. And then the mechanical speedometer and odometer all looks kind of good. I don't really see any issues in there, and I'm just going to leave it alone. But it looks okay. 87,000 miles. Yeah, unless somebody else has opened it up and changed it, but I haven't changed it. Put that over there. Now you're left with the housing. The glass is just a little bit fogged. It's actually plastic, I think, but it's just a little bit fogged. You can see some kind of lines in it. There's a little gasket here that's kind of dry. And of course the labels long ago came off. So I'm trying to figure out if there's something I can do for that. Maybe I'll get a vinyl label printed up or something. I did take some time to polish up the covers just with a little headlight polishing kit. I may hit that one more time before I put it all back together. It helped a little bit, but wasn't magic. And I may put a little bit of just touch-up paint or something on the brushed rings there. But it looks good overall. You can see though, well, maybe you can see, there's threaded inserts, metal threaded inserts that are pressed into several of these holes. And a couple of them started to break apart when I took it apart. One broke a little bit worse than the others. I think what I'm going to do there is I've managed to get all the threaded inserts apart from the screws once they were out of the cluster. So I think what I'm going to do is use a little epoxy, put them back in, hold that plastic together best I can, and just hope for the best. Otherwise, this is obviously a pretty expensive unit to replace. You can see the remains. This is plastic here, but you can see the remains from some corrosion, and that's what this is right here. This is a little threaded plate that is used to mount the cluster to the bracket on the bike. I cleaned it up best I could, sprayed it with just some rust stop black paint, and just slide that right back in place. I think that'll be fine. It's also a little bit of a tired gasket here around the edges. I'm just being careful with that, and just going to leave that. All right, so on the bulb cluster, you can see a couple things maybe. So these sockets here are designed to pull out. You can pull those out from the back side. It can be done. It wasn't the easiest to do, and while I had this out, it really was probably easier to replace them from this side if you're careful. The other thing about these I discovered, and I'll take one out to show you. So that's what it looks like when it comes out. You can see it's got some metal connectors here. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little corrosion on there. I started to clean up because I wasn't getting some great connections. Now there's two types of bulbs in here. There's the larger and the smaller, and I have the numbers documented here somewhere. But I put the LEDs in almost all the locations. I'll tell you why I didn't put it in the other one. So they just kind of snap into place. Now one thing that's definitely kind of makes me nervous is that this trace plastic with the traces in it is pretty delicate, and you can probably see right back in here there's just some copper tabs that kind of bend over and rest against the injection molded plastic here. So I tried to clean those up a little bit, but it was hard to do without getting them bend. You know, I did the best I could. So the high beam light was definitely burned out. That's why I replaced it. That's the bottom one. And then when I was in there, I did some more LEDs. So I also found I had some loose connections. So I got a little bit of wiggle here. I'm going to see if I can work on that a little bit more. And I got a lot of wiggle in this one. So I'm going to, what I did on the turn signal bulb, because I have the same issue here, is I just, not too sophisticated, but right behind the connections on the socket, I snipped a small piece of zip tie to spread the connections out just a little bit more after I made sure all the connections were nice and clean. That seemed to work okay. These are all white LED bulbs. You can get colored bulbs, but I already had color lenses, so I didn't bother with that. They seem to be nice and bright. let's see, again, that's the turn signal. This is the oil pressure switch. This is the generator. This is the clutch, the neutral, and then this is the high beam. The generator was the one that I left in as an incandescent bulb, and an LED bulb may have worked, but my understanding of the wiring is that you have power on all these bulbs, I guess I should say. You got power on one side, and then it closes a ground circuit on the other side to light it up. So you've got the loop, you've got the path, you got a light. On the generator, what seems to be happening is that I have power on one side and then the generator power on the other side. So if they're balanced, the light stays out. When the generator output starts to drop and it comes below the 12 volts that's coming from the power on circuit, then the bulb starts to glow and light up. And I think it finally gets fully lit when there's generators not producing any power. I'm pretty sure that that's the way it works. At least that's the way I'm reading the wiring diagram. So I was a little concerned that the LED may act a little funny with that unbalanced power in it. I don't know if it would dim very well. So I decided I would just keep it as an incandescent bulb. It works fine, and I don't know, it seemed to make sense to me. So that's how the cluster goes. It should go back just the opposite way if it came apart. Trying to be real careful with this whole trace. I don't want to have to replace this. And frankly, if the Gage cluster was toes up, I would probably replace it with just a whole electronic dash from somewhere. I think it'd probably be easier, but trying to keep the classic look. All right, if I got anything wrong, let me know in the comments. Thanks.